Welcome to another edition of the Last Negroes at Harvard podcast. I'm Kent Garrett. There were 18 of us in the Harvard College class of 1963. We are all over 83 years old now, and for the last 5 years we have produced a weekly podcast. Today our guest is Stephen Grant. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop with an MFA in poetry and fiction. He lectured as an adjunct professor of innovation and consumer behavior for the Pamplin College of Business at Virginia Tech. His new book is titled Mailman, My Wild Ride Delivering the Mail in Appalachia and Finally Finding Home. I'm joined by 20 of my Harvard classmates. All right, why don't we get started then, and we'll start with John.
Oh, okay. Well, John Woodford here in my home state of Michigan, and I'm in Ann Arbor, not my hometown. And our classmate, my wife, Elizabeth, is here from home state of Ohio. So you want to say what you're doing or whatever.
Okay.
I'm just happily retired and happy to drop into this.
Okay, welcome. Glad to see you, Liz. Allison. Cindy.
Hi, my name is Allison Wardle. I'm called Cindy, and I was in the class of 63, like most of the rest of us. And let's see, I was in the Peace Corps in Turkey, then got a master's at Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard. And then shortly after I moved to Italy, where I've been living since, not doing anything that had anything to do with my education. Yeah.
Okay. And, Jeff. Okay. Jeff Fox, class 63. I graduated in Arabile Dictu, and then went to worked in Venezuela. And after that, I'm a sociologist, and I'm now in Spain writing fiction. Okay, Nick.
Nick Bancroft, Medfield, Mass. Here for a couple of days in Medfield, back from a vacation, nice relaxing vacation with lots of grandchildren. My wife and I are catching up on sleep.
Alden.
I grew up in northwestern Connecticut on a farm, and remember walking out to the street, the road, which was maybe 2/5 of a mile, to open the mailbox and get the mail. So I now live outside of San Francisco.
Okay. David Hoffmer.
Born in Medford, Mass, but grew up in Puerto Rico, Guatemala, and Brazil. In Rio, we lived in Rio for a few years, and I moved from Rio to Phillips Academy Andover at my parents' insistence because they didn't like the company I was keeping on the Laguna Beach.
And then you worked with even worse company at Andover, right?
Right, exactly. They had no idea what they were.
Jerry.
Jerry Secundi in Pasadena also went to Andover with David. And David made a horrible mistake, left the girls in Ipanema to come to Andover. David, what were you thinking?
What was I thinking?
David Lelaval.
I'm in New York City. I'm from New York City. I'm a historian of India.
Okay, and Ronnie Blau.
Grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. Live now in Newton, Massachusetts. Just got back from California last night. Been in TV and video all my life.
Okay. George.
George Jones, class of 63, currently living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, hanging out with John and Eliza whenever I can. And I didn't go to Andover.
David Allen.
In Concord in a car, but I'll be home soon enough. But grew up in a farm in southern Indiana. Rural life, in my view, is the only way it makes any sense to grow up.
Okay.
Business, government, academics, all those good things. Looking forward to today. Thanks.
Okay. Marcy.
so that the whole thing is that.
I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I run a nonprofit in New York City, which has been the information center for citizens working to protect and preserve the natural systems and habitats that human beings need for survival.
Okay, and then Roger.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Roger is from Ireland. Although I grew up in the UK, my father had a farm, grew up there. I moved to Ireland about 30 years ago and met my lovely wife, Helen. And when we got married, someone thought it was a good idea that I got a job with the Postal Service as a better income, you know, a more steady income.
Okay.
Which was a great way of getting to know the community here in Kinvara, on the western tip of Galway. And so like I had 15 years on the delivery before I retired.
Okay.
And thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. And Steve Grant, thank you for joining us. Welcome, and tell us about your life in the book.
Sure. My name's Steve Grant. I live in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is the home of Virginia Tech, big land grant engineering school down here in southwestern Virginia. We moved here when I was young because my father was a professor of engineering here at the university. But we were Appalachian really by descent. The Grants moved to West Virginia in 1780. And everybody up to my father's grandfather made window glass. So for nearly 200 years, that's what brought us here from Scotland. And I myself have worked, my day job has been as a brand strategist and consumer strategist doing market research until the pandemic, when I got laid off. Nobody was hiring. I needed health care for myself and for my family, but the U.S. Postal Service was hiring. And that is what I did for a year during the pandemic before going back kind of to the previous trajectory of my career. So I had the privilege of growing up here, knowing what it's, knowing the town and the people. And then I got to see it in an entirely new light when I became a mailman. And that's what the book's about.
Okay, good. Okay, so we want to hear about the book. Yeah.
Well, I could tell you about how it ended up getting written. I've always wanted to be a writer. I've been a voracious reader since I was a young guy. My granny, who lived with us, used to spend her Social Security check in part on buying me a book when it was always a big day in the house when her Social Security check would come in, and got my English degree from NC State. I then went to the Iowa Writers Workshop in my early 30s. Becoming a father kind of interrupted, my nascent writing career, but I had written a detective novel set in West Virginia, and a friend of mine connected me with a literary agent, the guy who's now my agent, a man named David Granger, and he very generously read the book. He said, "Hey, I really like this, but I don't do fiction anymore. It's such a heartbreaker trying to take fiction to market. Do you have any nonfiction?" And that is when I told him, well, I got a couple of sketches I wrote during my time as a mailman during the pandemic. And he was like, "Wait a second, you were a mailman?" And so he said, send me what you wrote. And so I sent that into him, and that was on a Friday, and on a Sunday, I got an email from him that said, like, "Get ready to write this book. We're going to sell it." And so Granger took us, helped me put a proposal together. We took the book to market. 4 different publishers looked at it. Ultimately, Simon & Schuster bid on it and won my business. And so then working with them as a debut author, having never written anything of book length. That took about 2 years, and it's been kind of a wild ride ever since. So I was on CBS on this Monday. We filmed on Friday. That was a new experience for me, being in a television studio. But the book has gotten a great reception so far. It's been a real treat. And Kent, you were one of the folks that reached out directly to me that had a podcast and was interested. I'm always intrigued, like, why, it's like, frankly, I've been intrigued by the entire process. I'm intrigued my agent took me as a client. I'm intrigued that somebody purchased the book. I'm intrigued that people are buying it. And I guess people do want to read a book about delivering the mail and what it's like to be a mailman. So,
I mean, are you a hero now, or what? How do you?
I am not a hero. Roger, as he mentioned, he delivered the mail for 15 years. I was just sort of coming out of my rookie phase when my year was up. It's a very difficult job. It's a physical job. There's a lot of skill to it that I never imagined when I started it. But I did get a chance to see, in a much deeper way than a journalist would, just how much. Again, Roger, you mentioned, like, that's how I got to know the community where I lived.
Yeah.
It's like, you will get to know the people in your town. You will know every house, every footpath, every, people's dogs, who owns a horse, all of that stuff. And you become part of the fabric of the everyday rhythm and life of the community, and a pretty different for a white collar guy like me, to not just be sitting in front of a monitor all day long, but to be out and be part of people's lives.
Mm-hmm. George.
So my father was a mailman.
Outstanding.
He delivered the mail in Muskogee, Oklahoma for probably, 40 years, maybe more. And I'm just wondering what your actual mechanism was. Did you drive a car? Did you carry a bag? How did you actually do it?
Yeah. So just let me say one thing about people who had a relative who was in the Postal Service. So I got free coffee at Starbucks and McDonald's when I was a letter carrier, because the manager at the Starbucks across the street from the Postal Service had been a letter carrier herself. And the young lady who worked at the McDonald's had a grandfather and an uncle who were both letter carriers. And so you kind of got an immediate benediction from them, because they knew what you were dealing with. I was a rural carrier, so sometimes I drove the government-owned vehicle, the LLV, the same little aluminum thing built by Grumman that's been on the road since I was in high school, which is a long time ago. And so that route here in the Corporate Research Center at Virginia Tech is classified as rural, but it's really not. It's a bunch of labs, it's startup companies, it's parts of the university have a function here. And that was much like being a city mailman. I would dismount, I had mail in a bag, and would go from office to office doing that. But then on the rural routes, I drove my Toyota pickup truck, and mostly would put parcels in the bed or in the cab of the truck, and deliver that way. And that was really going house to house to house, taking stuff to the front door. One of y'all mentioned that they had gotten to where I was delivering a refrigerator and a freezer to a house. The Postal Service will carry anything up to 70 pounds. And we had people, for instance, this couple that I delivered to, clearly it was the pandemic. They could not get into the store. At that time, nobody was shipping appliances. Their refrigerator freezer had gone out. So they ordered a dorm-sized refrigerator, a dorm-sized freezer. And I thought, I'm authorized to go up to a half a mile from the main road on foot. And so I carried it up to their house. They were very surprised to see me. And they told me that I remember the lady of the house it was foggy, and so I was kind of coming out of the fog towards them, sitting on their front porch drinking coffee, and she goes, "Tom, there's a man coming up the hill," and you could always say, "United States Postal Service, ma'am," and immediately any fear that they had would be dispelled. And they're very happy to see me with their new refrigerator and freezer, and then they kind of the gears started turning in their head, and they were like, "So you forded the creek?" And I was like, I did, but I, honestly, out of boredom and just to see if I could do it as much as anything else. But I'm an avid fly fisherman, so it's like wading around in a creek is nothing new to me. And so carried that up to them. But they gave me a very excellent cup of coffee, which was always a bonus for a mailman. And I went on my way. But it was that mostly, I'm not a small guy in the post. I'm about 6'3", and because I had the pickup truck as my own vehicle, I ended up carrying a lot of parcels. And so the regulars would, when I wasn't carrying for a regular, they were on their own route, and I got the bags of dog food and the chicken feed, and one guy ordered a full set of tires for his pickup truck, like 4 tires, and so I'm sure he wanted him in his garage, but I delivered him right to his front door. So I said, 2 can play at this game, and so it was wild to see some of this. That was the other thing. It was wild to see what people ordered. You got to see everything that they had brought to their home, and during the pandemic, it was everything.
What were your colleagues like? The other mail people?
Well, they were fish out of water that I was. I showed up day one with my briefcase and a cup of coffee, and they were all like, what does this guy think he's going to take some meetings before we get started delivering the mail? And it was one of those things. The moment I got in there, I was like, because I thought maybe I'll need to take notes. So if I bring my briefcase, I have my notebook in there, I have my pens and pencils. And it's like, I was not taking any notes. I was sorting mail. Kat, who was a sort of a floating assistant that helped all the carriers a few days ago, I brought her a signed copy of the book because she's a big figure in it. And she said, "Steve, we did not know what to think of you when you showed up." We're like, "What is this guy?" And I heard on my very first day, I overheard from 2 cases over, Route 8, which was my home route where we live. I heard my letter carrier say, "I don't know what he's doing here. He lives in a big house up on the mountain." And oh, what does he do? He's some kind of economist. He gets a magazine called The Economist. And I have worked as a behavioral economist, but I'm not that kind of economist. But there was a lot of speculation as to who I was like. These folks for the most part were local people that had grown up in the area and were looking for a solid job and had made a career out of working in the Postal Service. But it wasn't everybody was not local. One of the guys I worked with, Lyle, was from Canada. He was Canadian, became an American citizen, and had lived in Alaska. And I never got the full story about how he wound up from Alaska in southwestern Virginia. There was another guy in our office, a city carrier, who had grown up in the former Soviet Union. I remember overhearing him saying, like, "Oh, the Postal Service is very comfortable for me. It's a big government bureaucracy like Soviet Union." And so we did have a mix of people in there, but pretty quickly the work of delivering the mail, particularly during the pandemic, it was a crucible, and it was just like everybody was blue. Everybody was there to deliver. I put it in the book as it was us against the mail every day, and we had to work together in order to be able to do that for the people in Blacksburg.
Well, how efficient is the post office? I mean, what's the status of the post office?
Well, it gets, I think without a lot of evidence, it's thrown at it by sort of like, I think of them as anti-institutionalists, or they want to privatize the post office. They're like, oh, the post office is inefficient. Well, anybody that's worked in a large for-profit enterprise can tell you those aren't particularly efficient either. So let's start there. If it's staffed by human beings, it's not going to be optimally efficient. So, but I'll also say that the Postal Service does a giant job every day, and it runs on a clock, and it does quite literally run like clockwork. Like the mail trucks come up from Greensboro and from Roanoke every day at the same time. The clerks and the handlers start to handle the mail, and that whole ballet happens every day in the post office, and then they set it up again for the next morning. And what I saw mostly was tremendous, a very coordinated, efficient operation. I will tell you that when Louis DeJoy was appointed the Postmaster General, and they started tearing out mail sorting machines without really a plan in place to compensate for that loss of capacity, we started getting weird stuff would happen. Like when you think of the mail, you think of an envelope, and we would get what they call DPS, which is delivery point system mail. That's all machine sorted. So in the morning, we would get several trays of that, and then little packages, big parcels, and all that. And some days, once DeJoy showed up and started with his program, we'd get there and there'd be no mail. We'd just get parcels. And so it'd be like, okay, I guess nobody's getting any mail today. We're just delivering packages. And then the next day you would get all of the mail. You would get all of Monday's mail and all of Tuesday's mail. And there were just these sort of glitches that were running through the system. And I've heard that in major metros like Los Angeles or Philadelphia, it got really bad, where the system could almost be paralyzed by some of the shocks that were moving through it.
Well, what surprised you about your work? Did you have something very unexpected about the routine that you found yourself in?
I think all of it was unexpected for me. I walked in a state of blissful ignorance. I sort of imagined I would be, whistling down a country lane and look at a pie cooling on somebody's windowsill, and maybe rescuing somebody from an overturned tractor or something, like, kind of boys' life fantasies. And what I discovered was the act of casing the mail in the morning, getting all of the mail into route order before you loaded it into your truck. It was very difficult. You effectively had to memorize every address on your route. It's very hard. I see Roger violently nodding his head. I imagine that's the same on any route anywhere, irrespective of the country.
Yeah, we were up and not out of there till 12 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
and then had to drive. Then had to drive a route,
Yeah, it depended on how much mail there was, and if it was really jumbled up. If a lot of it was machine sorted, great, but sometimes we would get what they call raw mail, which is just loose, and they had not sorted it. They just sort of knew this is on your route, figure it out. And so, that there was an exactitude to that I had not expected. Like, I had to memorize the route, and to be able to do it in any length of time that was going to be reasonable to get out on the road. I was surprised by how physical the job was. I was in good shape when I started the job, but there's being in good shape and working out at the gym or getting dressed to go for a run. And then there's like, you're out in the real world, people's sidewalks or walkways are busted up. It's wet. It could be cold. It could be hot. There's dogs, there's bees, there's snakes. You're it's still on you to put the mail in somebody's mailbox or put it on their front porch. That was surprising. And I, as a consumer psychologist, I was not particularly surprised that I met all sorts of people on the route, but I was surprised how personally hurtful it could be when a customer was really angry or really mean to you when you're on the route. It changed my attitude towards, I try to always maximal courtesy when I talk to a service person now in any capacity, because you don't know how hard their job is and what their day has been like. It has an impact on people.
Well, as someone who's read a good deal of the book, I would say that, without being spoiler, but your own the challenges to your own psyche because of your background and what had happened to put you in the job, and then dealing with people of the sort you hadn't dealt with before, plus family dynamics and other things. It's really a lot of drama going on internally and externally in the book that's not apparent when you just think about what the book is, but your own the stress on yourself. I mean, there's sort of a point where you have an awakening of, oh, look where I am now, because you were in a certain kind of a job traveling around the world, and then all of a sudden you have to take this job so that you guys can put meat on the table and pay your housing. I mean, it's quite that part of the story is, I think, the most moving, really, to me.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I wrote the first draft of the book. I was just like, I'm just going to talk about delivering the mail. And my editor wrote back to me and said, this is sort of reading like your resume. I don't really think this is what folks want. They want to know more, John, of what your interior experience was like, what was going on in your life. And when there was an excerpt from the book that ran in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, and I had a lot of folks reach out to me that had had a similar sort of mid-career jolt like I had. And we financially, we were in good shape. I had planned for the contingency of potentially being laid off, not for a year, but I've been in, when you work in marketing, any kind of economic downturn, you're the canary in the coal mine, right? It's like the first thing people do is cut the marketing budget because you're not central to the value chain of the company. And so I had anticipated, I might be out of work for 3 to 5 months, not 13 months. And so with the pandemic as this sort of wild card, it's like, okay, it's possible that like maybe things just don't go back to normal like things were before. You might be delivering the mail for a long time. This is going to be an adjustment, and it really was. And I think it's funny. I'd listened to a couple of y'all's podcasts in preparation for talking with you today, and you're all extremely accomplished, right? You've all had these very interesting, rich lives where you've gone out into the world and you've had big careers and you've had families, and a lot of those experiences make up who you are. And a lot of that's your work. You go to school. Maybe you used what you learned in university in your job. Maybe you didn't. I don't know how much I did, but when your work is taken from you, it's deeply destabilizing. I didn't realize how much of my identity was wrapped up in that. Oh, I'm a vice president, and I fly to conferences, and I work with the Aspen Institute, and I do all this impressive sounding stuff. And it's like, no, right now you're a mailman. And what does that mean? Who am I? Is there some intrinsic part of me that is separate from that identity? And I think that's ultimately where I wound up. My wife and my girls still love me. They still saw me as the same person. It was all between my ears was where all the noise was, and coming to terms with that was pretty transformative, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I worked in TV and video all my life, and now, like my classmates, I'm in my 80s, and I still identify with it. Now I'm doing videos for organizations on a voluntary basis.
Yeah.
And when I'm not working on a video, I do feel a little lost. Like, who am I? And in one's 80s, I would expect that would be in the rear view mirror, but it's not quite. At this moment, I am working on a video, and it kind of gives me an identity that I don't have when I'm, not like in your case, doing the work that you've done all your life and have had to change.
I think that's really, really important, Ron. And, I'll tell you for those of you that might have been an engineer or know engineers, my dad was an engineer all the way through, like a potato. It is who he was, right? And when he passed away, I was cleaning out his desk, and it was an engineer. Yeah, somebody's.
George, your audio.
Multiplied, George.
We love George, but I'm not sure 3 times.
Cloning himself, like cloning himself before our eyes.
Too much of a good thing. But there was a engineer's quadrille pad on his desk, and it was half full of equations of something he was working on, and he didn't need to work, but it's just who he was. And I thought about that, like, really right up until the very end. That's the work he was doing, because it was so central to who he was, just how he was in the world. And so I don't have the perspective of life that you all have, but I wonder what that's been like for you, that you've left your main career, but you're still here, and you have family, and you have children and grandchildren, and yet it seems like most of you are still working in some capacity, which is quite frankly encouraging.
Yeah,
So,
Marcy.
Yeah, Marcy, you had your hand up.
Yeah. People who are concerned about online hacking and surveillance today will only use snail mail right now. Have you noticed that or thought about that?
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. There was another version of the book where I wrote too much about the post office and not enough about myself. And my editor was like, look, this isn't a policy paper, but maybe a little more Bildungsroman and personal narrative, and a little less on policy. But I did see some of that, Marcy, and I will tell you a couple of things about the post office, which is, for starters, because it is a federal service that is provided to you by the United States government, everything that goes through the mails is protected by the Fourth Amendment. Now, it's supposedly protected by the Fourth Amendment when you ship it through FedEx or UPS, but like, you sign a terms of service anytime you send something with them. There's none of that business with the U.S. Postal Service. You are explicit, and USPS has the nation's first federal law enforcement organization. The U.S. Postal Inspectors are also protecting the mail. And if you walk a letter and you personally stick it in the metal mailbox at the post office, it will get where it is supposed to go, and it will be secure and unmolested on that passage, protected by the Constitution and protected by the USPS law enforcement. And and it's unable to be, without a warrant, it is unable to be surveilled. It's a piece of paper. Particularly if you didn't type it on your computer, if you wrote it out by hand, it's actually about as secure a piece of communication as you can send today, because it can't be spied upon. And I have seen, and my daughters, who are in their late teens now, my oldest is in her sophomore year at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and my youngest just finished high school, and they send letters to their friends all the time. But I think I don't know if it's a novelty thing to just be able to have that physical communication with each other, but it's a lot more intentional, I think, than just texting.
Hamp.
Yeah. I'm Hampton Howell, Harvard 63, and I graduated magna cum laude. And I tried to become a mailman, and I was rejected. And so we shouldn't be talking about it like it's some kind of a floor. I had just moved to New York City, and I thought it'd be a very healthy position to have, walking around outside all day. And I memorized some of the addresses, but I guess other people memorized better, and I didn't get the position. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. I took a pretty, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but there's a somewhat notorious psychological test that you have to take now.
Oh, you flunked
that I took online, and as someone that is in my previous life had designed psychological instruments to test for different consumer attitudes and such, it was pretty weird to be on the receiving end of that. And I was just like, okay, I think they're looking for my ability to handle stress, and they want to see how conscientious I am. But I know it had a pretty good bounce rate. I think they were probably only taking about 25% or so of the folks getting screened by that test. And then you have to pass a very thorough background check, because you're handling people's personal documents, and that has another bounce rate as well. So yeah, Roger.
Oh, Steve, I love what you're saying. And I was just going to say that my experience was that it is a unique position in a rural community anyway. Bearing in mind, some people might only see, you might be the only person they see some days in the winter. And I found that lots of people would stop the post van when they were out traveling, and you had to know exactly who they were, otherwise you caused offense, and you had to be able to sort through and find them quickly. And therefore, when I was sorting the mail, I found it best to actually bring to mind a face in front of me. As soon as I saw the name on a letter, brought the face to mind, and as soon as I could do that, I became adept at sorting the mail. And the other thing I'd say is, whenever there was a handwritten letter, I made sure that got to its destination, even if I might leave out a bank statement or something like that, if we were under pressure.
Yeah, I always, if I saw a handwritten letter or someone had ordered a book, I always made sure that got the white glove treatment, right? I would walk that right to the front door, because it was important to somebody. And you bring up a really good point, Roger, which is, I think the toughest thing for me, the most unexpected thing for me, was it is a feat of memory being a mailman. You're almost like a Homeric poet, Yeah. You have to have this, or our London cabbie is probably closer to it, where they have to pass this test called the knowledge, where they have to know every little capillary and street and alleyway in London. And you are expected to do the same thing in your community as a mailman. And remember, and I would do the same thing, Roger. I would see the house in my mind as I worked through the mail, and I would see the faces of the people that lived there. And in a world where computers and our phones do a lot of remembering for us, I think some of the last people that are actually having to do those big feats of memory are probably working at the Postal Service.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Alden, you had your hand up.
Alden.
Yeah, the two of you, Steve, you and Roger, talked a little bit about rural and knowledge and knowing things and so on. One of the things, I grew up in this small town in northwestern Connecticut, and I get back there a lot. There is a kind of community sense in the post office there. I'll give you two examples. I one time took a letter and dropped it off, and I forgot to put a stamp on it. Within half an hour, I got a call at the house I grew up in, my sister-in-law's house, and another house, which is a summer house, saying that I'd left the stamp off. And then and often I'm there for Christmas, and sometimes we get packages sent there. And I've been there on the 24th when somebody calls from the post office and say, "Hey, you've got a package," and it's like 4:30, and I say, I can't make it there, and they say, "That's all right. There's a dumpster right outside. We'll put it in the dumpster." and you can come and pick it up. And that has happened more than once. I mean, it happens often.
Oh yeah.
So it's. Do you have that sense? The two of you have that sense of community and serving the community in a rural area. I don't know what it's like in an urban area.
When my father passed away, there was some insurance documents that they had tried to send to the old house, and the mail had already been shut off there, and so they were getting returned back to the insurance office, but the city carrier remembered, hey, wait, this is Steve's dad on Route 8. He went to talk to Dustin, who was my regular. So Dustin and I shared a route, and I got a text from Dustin saying, hey, we're gonna mail this to your house. I'll give it to Tina, and she'll put it in your mailbox tomorrow, just to make sure that you get it. But it's like the whole post office knew that Dad had passed away, and they knew I was his son, and they knew where I lived, and they took the trouble to make sure that these important documents got to me so that I could give them to my brother John, who was the executor. But it is that being enmeshed with the community, I think, in a way that other jobs don't really achieve that level of familiarity and understanding about who lives there and what their needs are.
Does the connection with the community have a way of excluding political sentiments in order to make?
Well, I wish I could say that's true.
Happy.
You know, we there's a section about it in the book. It was an election year, and so the first thing I'll say is that there's all the mail that we deliver, and then there's political mail, and it literally comes in a stack, and it has a red paper band around it that says political, just in case you were confused. And that stuff has to be delivered to every single house that is addressed on it. You have to make absolutely sure that gets in the mail. It's privileged communication that we have to make sure gets delivered. The other thing is ballots. So we were handling a lot of people's ballots. I would have people hand them to me directly. I had a special envelope that I would stick them in. And those we did not send to the sorting center. Those we, at the end of the day, all the ballots that have been collected in the outgoing mail were carried directly to the registrar in the county seat, so that they were, from the moment the postman had them in his hand, they were secure and got traveled. We had all kinds politically working in the post office. So we had red hat MAGA folks. There was one carrier who had a calendar of Ronald Reagan that she kept on her, on her, and we could hear her turn on Rush Limbaugh the moment she got in her mail truck. And you know, we had foaming in the mouth labor agitators, more to the left, but we're also all part of the carrier pool there as well. But at the end of the day, we were all letter carriers first. Our job was to deliver the mail first, and I actually thought it was a model for how, because everybody knew each other, they saw each other as people first, and less these political labels as kind of an immediate categorization for them. And I wish there was more of that in American society right now, where I think we tend to be sorted into jobs where we're more politically homogenous, and there isn't a lot of opportunity to sort of see the humanity in the other people that might have a different set of political views than we do. George, you had your hand up for a while there.
Yeah, I haven't read the book yet. I wonder, what was the racial and ethnic makeup of the community that you served?
So Blacksburg is in Appalachia. It's pretty white. That being said, the U.S. Postal Service has a long tradition of hiring African Americans, and we had many African Americans working in our office. I would say, relative to the community, disproportionately hired. Dustin, who was my regular, was a tall, good-looking black guy. And there were a couple of guys on the city side. Felicia, who I worked with, who was a mail handler, was black. And you know, for all the accusations of like, I had never experienced personally in my entire life, and never at the post office, any sort of racial animus whatsoever. Again, everybody was blue at the Postal Service. And so, but it was unusually diverse for a pretty racially homogenous area of the country. The university town, Virginia Tech is very diverse, but the moment you get outside the town line and outside the university, it just looks like more West Virginia, quite frankly.
But there was a historic black community. Like you said, Wake Forest?
Wake Forest, that's right. And it was still black down there off Price's Fork. There were still 2 black churches. At one point, there was a general store down there that was no longer in operation. And it was again, nothing I knew growing up there. But as I began to deliver the mail to that community, you know, you turn down a road and I was like, huh, everybody on this road is black. Like all these little farms, everybody on this road is black. What's going on? And then I ran into Chandra, a friend of mine that I'd grown up with. She recognized me when she answered the door. And I said, I'm embarrassed to ask this, but like, is this a historically black community down here? And she goes like, oh yeah, these are all freemen that founded this community after the war. And I said, well, I should have known that. I'm sorry that I didn't. But I wanted to be sure that got into the book, John, because it's you know, and Blacksburg's town history, when the university expanded, it displaced the black community in town. Actually, I guess through eminent domain, they moved folks out of there. And at least that's now documented now and recognized as part of the history university.
David, Alan.
With Blacksburg in our focus, first of all, on a personal note, a cousin who's, I believe she's 83, Sharon Harrell, is there because her father, my uncle, was a professor of economics.
Oh, fantastic.
At Tech. Sharon actually has created a respite for dogs, which if you have a dog and you've gone away and you needed a place, you probably Sharon's business. Going back actually to Hamps and your thinking, from the beginning here, I'm being reminded of a quotation on a t-shirt I have by John Lennon. I don't know if I have it exactly right, but it goes along the lines of a working class hero is something to be. And it obviously makes the implication that this is a proposition taken from somebody who's not working class. And I can't help noticing how pivotally relevant that is today, when it's very clear that we have not taken account of the working class in political outcomes. I'll even say that before I started a program at the Kennedy School, I needed some income. I took a job delivering newspapers in my community, facing exactly what you were talking about, which is having to memorize the route. Yes, it was in a car, it wasn't walking, but I think you bring to the fore for us in a crucial way here. I'm interested, John's already through the book. Clearly, it's intrigue. I bring to the fore for us the importance of our, I did grow up in an ivory tower, but getting out of our ivory tower and as you have done and Roger have done, taking on the mantle of the people who've been left behind and who are determining the future of our country.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there. I make the observation in the book that at the end of the day, white collar or blue collar, your job for the most part asks a lot from you. It wants the whole pith of your day from the moment you wake up until the moment you get home at night and have dinner. If you're lucky, it might take longer than that. It certainly did when I was delivering the mail. And so if you're talking about a human being and how they're spending their entire waking life, you can look at it in cold economic terms and say like, well, this guy has a skill set that there's a lower demand, lower supply of, so he's going to be paid more for his time. But what's the economy for? I'm going to wear my politics on my sleeve a little bit here. And why are we generating all this wealth just to allow it to be concentrated in the hands of a few? And I'm not some Bolshevik. I believe that capitalism creates wealth and a lot of innovation and services, but the folks working at the post office, particularly when you're starting out, should be paid a living wage. I wasn't. I was very fortunate that my union had negotiated health care for me and my family, but I was not making, I'm not talking, it was not a replacement salary. I wasn't even really, I think I was below the poverty line much of the time that I worked there at the Postal Service. And I think it's an outrage, frankly, that I was working a full-time job, but couldn't really afford, I was spending my own savings to put groceries on the table for me and Alicia and the girls. And, there's a reason you would be angry about that if you were a blue collar person that developed the skills it took to do your job, the social connections to do your job, and then here you are struggling, and yet your work is valuable to the community. There's nobody on your route that would say, oh, this guy's doing a terrible job and I don't want the mail delivered to my house. It's like, no, everybody wants the service, and yet somehow we're not compensating people commensurate to the value that they're providing to the university and to the community. And so I don't know how we redistribute wealth more equitably. I'm not a policy guy, but I think a huge part of the political upheaval that we've been through in the last few years here has a lot to do with just bread and butter issues around that. Mm-hmm. And I left this year with a pretty radically changed perspective on what working class people go through to as part of earning the bread by the sweat of their brow. So
from my point of view, you have gone to the heart of what we must deal with if we hope to retrieve ourselves from Trump the dictator and all those who are empowering it. I think you go to the heart of it, in my view.
Nick, you had your hand up.
Nick. Yeah, all good discussion. I spent a couple of years in India and some of that time in Mumbai, which is like Manhattan in size on a peninsula. And the British, the English, of course, very logical people, came up with a numbering system for, say, a long avenue that stretched maybe 5 miles up the peninsula of Bombay. And their system for numbering the houses was when they were built. You can imagine what the post office had to do with that. And they lived with cross references. And there was 5 5 apartment houses up from the nearest fire station, or next to the police station, take a right, and things like that. So it was really bizarre, but somehow it worked.
Well, that's the story of India, but somehow it works. And
Yes.
I will say, as someone that has lived among the British people and done a lot of work in India over the last few years,
Yes.
there is nothing surprising in what you just told me.
Well, we used to say TII. This is India.
That's very good. That's very good.
Oh,
So when you're
Jeff.
yeah. Steve, I'm sure this is something you have reflected on, and I think we've got some hints of it in what you've said so far. But how do you feel that this experience changed your life? Of course, you have now a book out that you didn't have before. That's a big event. And where are you planning to go from here?
So, you know, I think that I do talk about this towards the end of the book. The most surprising thing to me out of the experience was once I was sort of over the shock of arrival of like what it took to deliver the mail and got past being overwhelmed by it. You know, once I loaded up the truck in the morning and was out on the route, my thoughts were my own. Just deliver the mail or deliver the parcels, and then I could be with my own thoughts for 8-9 hours a day. And that was something that I hadn't done in a couple of decades at that point. Prior to that, I had been consumed by work and meetings and email and campaigns and all the rest of it. And when I sort of got myself back. I spent time with myself in a way that I hadn't maybe since I had been an undergrad, or just as a teenager. And I don't think it's a coincidence that led to me being able to write the book. I think that kind of wool gathering, cloud watching part of yourself, writers cultivate that very carefully. I had the happy accident of being able to do that while I delivered the mail. Roger, you must know all about this. It's like you're out there and you're with yourself and you're on your own, and you talk with people every once in a while, but the rest of the time you're just free to think your own thoughts in your mind.
Postmen can be quite solitary individuals and very individualistic. And I was warned they don't make good union people. We don't stick together.
It's funny. Dustin, my regular on my route, he told me at the book launch, he said, I met you and I had the sense that you were going to be okay by yourself for long hours at a stretch. I thought, this guy has an active mental life and he's going to be all right out there. Some people can't deal with it. And they don't have the internal reserves to be able to sort of like spend time with themselves. And frankly, it is the thing I maybe miss the most about no longer being a mailman, because just to be out in the countryside here in the Blue Ridge Mountains that I love, and to be on my own for 9 hours at a go, pretty magnificent actually. And I think and how much I loved that, and what a respite that was from the sort of the rat race of my career was really surprising to me. I wouldn't have known that before I did it.
John, last question.
No, Eliza, you were going to ask a question.
I'm sorry.
Oh, she said, hey, Eliza? Oh, well, she's gone. I'll lower my... She was going to ask a question, but she's gone.
Might I check? We have learned how extraordinarily centered you are now, certainly, Steve. What do you expect to do next in the way of literary efforts?
Well, I wrote about blue collar work by accident. My my experience has been now 25 some years plus of white collar work, and I'd like to write a similar sort of story about what that was like, how that changed me, what I learned. I had a litmus test for myself when I wrote Mailman, which was, okay, but if a letter carrier reads this book, it has to ring true. They have to say, this is legit. This guy isn't sugarcoating it, or he got it wrong. And I've had many letter carriers write me and say, like, this is the real deal. This guy captures what it was like. You know, and I'd like to write something like that about white collar work, because it's not particularly, you know, you don't get chased by a dog flying a desk. You know, it's not inherently cinematic. But I think there's a lot of it's been an adventure in my life in a lot of different ways, and I'd like to see if I could pull a narrative that might ring true for other people that have worked. You guys sound like you've done a lot of stuff, frankly, that you were very interested in. And has been engaging. I cannot honestly say the same for much of the work I've done over the course of my career, and that does something to a person. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that burden and that experience as well.
You might bring those two worlds together in the third book.
Maybe so.
Which is what we need.
Marcy.
Oh, Liza's back. Let's have her question first.
I just have a really very simple question. When your time in the post office was coming to end and your last day was coming up, were you very, very happy?
You know, yes and no. I was excited to get back to my career. I was nervous about it as well. I realized I would be walking away from the friends that I had made over the course of that year. I thought that I was going to give, you know, I went in with the intention of giving 2 weeks notice, and my super said, you know, we actually have enough people staffed right now. You're good. You're done. And I was like, what? and you know, and I again, laboring under my own previous life, I was sort of like, oh, there'll be some transition of duties and I'll cross train whoever comes in after me. It's like, no, Steve, none of that is going to happen. They're going to go to the Postal Academy just like you did. And so I turned in my badge. I shook the man's hand, and that was that. I was no longer a mailman. And so I texted Dustin, my regular. I was like, hey man, I'm sorry I didn't get to personally say goodbye to you, but he actually delivers the mail to my office. And so I've had many chances to talk with him over the years as he's come by. But you know, Sam, who helped me out through the whole year, you know, I had to text her, and I ran into her in town and was able to talk with her. But you know, it was almost as jarring leaving as it was coming on board at the Postal Service.
Wow. Marcy, last question.
How can we save the public, or how can anyone save the public post office with all the great aspects it has and once had before they were destroyed? How can we save it from the forces of privatization?
Well, I think use it for starters. Certainly when you send parcels through priority mail or ground advantage or send a first class letter, those funds go directly into supporting operations at the Postal Service. I will also say the Postal Service is somewhat constitutionally protected. It is in the, I'm not going to get the article right, but like it's in the same part of the Constitution that organized the Navy, authorizes the Treasury to issue currency, to pursue pirates. It's a pretty wild clause in there, actually. And the establishment of post offices and post roads is part of that. same section. But I think they will have a devil of a time trying to get rid of the Postal Service. It is, after the national parks, it is the most popular part of the federal service. People really love their post person. They love their local post office for the most part. And I have seen how responsive, particularly folks in Congress, so congressional House staff and Senate staff, have been to the needs of constituents as postal customers and actually post people themselves. When the vaccines were rolling out, I wrote Senator Kane, and I was like, when is the Postal Service going to get the vaccine? He told me, his staff told me who to call in Richmond at the Department of Health. They were expecting my call when I got in touch with them, and they worked with us to make sure that all the delivery people in my area had access. We were some of the first to get access to the vaccine when it rolled out. And I think that shows the importance of the Postal Service. I think they're aware of the fact that it's, in some ways, it's the front line of government for a lot of people. And so I do think your congressional representatives would be responsive to that.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really fun, and good luck with the book and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your time. This was a real pleasure. What a unusual but wonderful podcast this is.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Kent.
That was Stephen Grant. His new book is titled Mailman, My Wild Ride, Delivering the Mail in Appalachia, and Finally Finding Home. And that's it for this edition of the Last Negroes at Harvard podcast. Thank you for joining us, and I will talk to you again next week. I'm Kent Garrett.